Have you ever had a moment as an adult when you thought back on your childhood games and realized that somehow your life today reflects those? Could you imagine playing corpse as a child and where that might take you? Well, we are going to hear quite the story today from our incredible guest, Dr. Qwynn Galloway-Salazar, or better known as Doc Q, the founder and CEO of In Their Honor, where storytelling, service, and soul uplift military connected communities. An Army veteran, end-of-life doula educator, and national leader in veteran care, Doc Q is transforming how we support service members through aging, illness, and grief. She's also the SVP of Engagement at PsychArmor and was recently named one of USA Today's 2024 Women of the Year. At her core, Doc Q is a movement maker, reminding us that care is a sacred act of community. Qwynn, welcome to the show. I am so excited to have you here today. Thank you so much for being here.
Jana, thank you so much for having me.
I feel like we're both very smiley, happy people. So I'm really curious to see how this goes as we talk about some heavy topics here. But I'm gonna kind of put us right there from the beginning. I usually ask guests to share the first experience they had with death. So maybe it was when you were a child. It could have been a loss of a pet or a family member or a friend. When did you realize death was a thing, and the magnitude of what that was? Are you comfortable sharing that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So it all started when, that's always like the storyline of the greatest books ever. To be honest, my relationship with death and dying started really early. So I'm getting ready to age myself a little bit, but it's okay. Um, Here in the States and probably around the world, there was an amazing author, and I'm pretty sure he's still alive. His name is R.L. Stine, and he used to write these books called Fear Street. Um,
Yes,
so we're
for
probably
those
around
who
the
are listening,
same.
I am having a very exciting moment because R.L. Stine, look, Quinn, I saved his books and I was like, these are going to be worth something one day. Like I kept them in mint condition, and I won't take the story away from you, but yes, I'm relating very hard to this right now.
So, a girlfriend of mine, her name is Stephanie. Stephanie and I used to read R.L. Stine's books when we were really young. And we had to be about between 7 and 10, when we started having these ideas that one of us would be a funeral director and the other one would be dead. And we started playing this game called Corpse.
Wow,
So, very early on, my friend Stephanie and I had this deeper understanding of death and dying and how dignity was so critical to death and dying. Now, here's what's interesting, and we can dive in later on. So, I ended up becoming a death doula, and Stephanie ended up becoming a hospice social worker.
whoa.
Now, if you cannot tell me rather, that the end of life work and profession didn't choose us, right?
Wow.
Choose it. It chose us as kids.
Wow. Okay, so I talk to a lot of people about death.
Yeah.
I've never heard people enacting that as children. I'm sure there are other people, and I'd be really interested to see if what their, path turned into, but wow, that is so telling.
So cool. I mean, and what's really interesting about it is, a few years ago, back in 2023, I released a course collection called Caring for Veterans Through the End of Life. And she was one of the advisors on the project, right? Like it resurfaced our whole childhood, our friendship, just the fact that we were able to have conversations and create these scenarios that were taboo and stigmatized. And, as kids, adults weren't talking to us about death and dying, but we were talking to each other about death and dying. And so it just opened up a playing field for us that we could have never imagined as we became adults.
Yeah. Did your parents know you were doing this? And if they did, what
Nope.
were their, and did you keep it hidden because you somewhere you felt like this is a thing that they wouldn't want us to do?
Yep, for years,
Yeah.
for years. And it was maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, she wrote a big piece about just our childhood and playing that game and how she was able to explore death and dying throughout her continuum based on the fact that we were not afraid of it as kids.
Wow. I'm gonna have to include that in the show notes too. That's incredible. Okay. So then
Yes.
when did you have an experience where someone you knew died and you had to navigate
Yeah.
it in a different sort of way?
So my first memory of someone dying had to be my great-grandparents. And I was in elementary school at the time. My great-grandmother died first, and then my great-grandfather died shortly after. But what I recall was when my great-grandfather died, I remember saying I wanted to give a speech at his funeral,
Wow.
right? I wanted to pay honor and tribute to the life that he lived. Um, but once again, still not having that fear of death, right? And I remember being a small child standing right above his casket, and he's right below me. And it didn't faze me at all. It was an honor of a lifetime to pay homage and tribute to the life that he lived and to share with the audience what he meant, well, not the audience, with his loved ones, what he meant to me.
Yeah. Well, how incredible because you also are a speaker and you also are sharing the stories of others. So that was also something in your early beginnings. This is incredible. I love this. Okay, well, I mean, there's so many things we could talk about, but one of the things I think you're able to help us get some understanding of is the lived experiences of veterans and how it relates to end of life. Um, okay, you're a veteran. Not you were.
I,
You are a veteran. I
yeah.
really want to acknowledge that. I'm not taking that away at all. Was that something you saw for yourself? At what point in your life was that the path that you chose or chose you?
Once again, I think it's a path that chose me. Prior to 9/11, that's when I enlisted in the United States Army. I had this dream that I wanted to be an FBI agent and I wanted to travel the world and do all these things. And joining the military, I knew that it would afford me some of the points that I would need, right? And so I joined the military. Um, what I never would have imagined was that right after coming out of my first round of training, that 9/11 would have happened in the US. And that changed, it shifted the whole trajectory of my life. Shortly after 9/11, I was mobilized. So that basically means I was called up, but I served stateside. I did not deploy to a combat zone, but I served stateside. And while I was serving on active duty at what was Fort Bragg in North Carolina, I ran the mailroom. And while running the mailroom, Jenna, I heard so many stories of the soldiers that we were getting ready to deploy, what their thoughts, what their fears, what their hopes were.
Oh,
But on the other end, I heard so many stories of soldiers that were coming back and what they experienced in the combat zone. And I would have never imagined at that time that just hearing all those stories would have also been a launching pad to what was next for me. And so shortly after I got off of active duty, I made the decision to go back to school. My bachelor's degree was in criminal justice because once again, I wanted to be an FBI agent. I wanted to be in law enforcement. And then I shifted to counseling. And I wanted to be able to address the needs of veterans that were returning back to society that were facing challenges with transition, facing challenges with the invisible wounds of war. So the trauma and the traumatic brain injuries and the moral and soul injuries that often arise for those that have served in combat. And so I did that for many years, right? I think me putting on the uniform allowed me to become a safe space, or better yet, a container for those who had stories that they wanted to share where where they could be vulnerable and transparent and know that the person that was receiving their stories was one that they could trust. And so from there, to be quite honest, it kind of catapulted. I went from really caring for veterans individually to really looking at systems, right? A systems approach, and how can we do this work to care for our service members, our veterans, their families, their caregivers, and their survivors throughout life's continuum.
Wow. Okay, I want to go back to the systems, but I also want to see how can you share with us the struggle of veterans keeping their stories to themselves? What is, like, oh, I think that I'm a well-receiving person. I'm here to hear stories. What experiences do they have or have they had or the fears they have that they decide, no, it's not worth opening up. What are some of the experiences they have when they do try to share their stories?
Yeah, trust is the big one, right? I think trust is one that will always be at the top of my list. And another is having someone that's willing to actively listen without passing judgment, without bringing their stereotypes or their biases or their perceptions of what they think a veteran's experience is. I tell people all the time, Jenna, every opportunity that I have to sit with a veteran, I come into the space as a blank slate. I don't care how many years I have been doing the work that I am so grateful to do. Every veteran's experience is different. And I will never walk into a space thinking I know aspects of their story because they have a childhood and a life prior to joining the military, and many have a life after they take the uniform off. And so I really work really hard to open up any conversation with open-ended questions where I allow them to be the expert in their story. And I think that's so important that we do. The one thing that I would say is, of course, know what branch they served in, know what time frame they served in. Was there a war going on when they served? What was the what was the cultural aspects or what was current affairs that were happening after that war that, may have shaped their identity coming out of the military.
Yeah.
Um, but really just meeting people where they are, right? With an open heart and just immense gratitude for the sacrifices that they made.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up so many of those points. The one that's really sitting with me is like culture changes, time changes us. Some of these people may have served in their 20s and they may live to be 80, 90. What we thought was quote unquote a good war or worthwhile, like those things change, right? And society changes. And so, I don't know because I don't know, but you may know. They may come home and they may feel like they were a hero, or they may, feel as if people acknowledge and respect them. And then maybe as time goes on, people's ideas change about what they served in. Have you seen that? Have you seen sort of this identity of themselves change, or maybe even how they felt about how they served?
Absolutely. So thinking in particularly with our Vietnam veterans, right? For many of them, they came home to a society that did not welcome them home.
Wow.
So for years, they carried those stories buried inside of them, many of them, right? And so, you know, when we offer opportunities for whether it's a Vietnam veteran or a Korean War veteran, you fill in the blank. When we offer them the opportunity to share the aspects of the story that they want to share, it's medicine for some of them because they have held that story for so long, wanting to be able to share aspects or the whole doggone story without feeling judged, without feeling as though they're going to be misunderstood or misheard. They just want to share, right? Um, but as a veteran, I feel so fulfilled in hearing the stories of those that serve because there's this camaraderie between veterans, right? Like, okay, once I hear that you served and I served, it's a part of our culture to talk smack, what fill in the blank, whatever word you want to use there. But what happens is oftentimes our veterans share what I like to call PG-13 versions of their
Yeah.
story.
It's
And
palatable for the rest of us, for the public. Yeah.
it's safe,
Hmm.
right? It's safe. It keeps whoever you're sharing that aspect with safe. But when someone knows that you've served or that you're connected in some way to the military, you see those walls come down. Right. And I've seen it happen with the Korean War veteran. I've seen it happen with Vietnam veterans across the spectrum with our global war on terrorism veterans. So our Iraq and Afghanistan veterans. I've seen those walls come down where they're able to tell their truth. Right. I think it's so important that we're able to tell our truth. And not everyone is adept to being able to hear those stories, right? I think it takes practice and rehearsal sometimes to be able to say, I'm the right person to hear those stories. Because if you're an empath, you may feel very strong to what you hear, right? But I think if we afford our veterans the opportunity to share their stories, especially as they're aging, or especially as they've received a terminal illness or they're dying. What medicine, what salve that is for their souls.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you found that as they, near end of life, that they are more open to sharing, that they're sharing things that are deeper that maybe they didn't even know? Is there something about the end of life coming closer that they shift their own ability to share, or even maybe truth with their own truth?
Yes, that piece of existential is huge, right? At the end of life, you hear about what regrets they may have
Mm.
had, right? Unfinished business, any guilt that they've carried, grief that they've carried, shame, forgiveness, whether that forgiveness is for themselves
Yeah.
or forgiveness that they need from their family because family dynamics shifted because of their service, or forgiveness for whatever occurred on the battlefield,
Hmm.
right? We start to see that there's that need for closure at the end of life to be able to say, okay, these were some of my experiences, and I'm ready to lay them down with someone that I can trust, that's companioning alongside of me, that can hear my truth. Absolutely.
Wow. Qwynn, how has this shaped your life? You're still young, there's lots of living to do. How do you feel like you're different in this world because of these, very precious and private and special stories that you've been able to witness and be with?
Ah, I look at life with my eyes wide open, right? I had an amazing mentor. She was a Marine veteran. And while her and I were journeying together, she was diagnosed with stage 4 metastatic breast cancer. And at the time, I was a doctoral student and I was finishing up my doctoral work. And we would have these conversations on a monthly basis about research. And then it shifted to dying and how lived experiences played a part in end of life experiences. And I was listening and I was bearing witness to my mentor
Mm.
dying.
Wow.
And one of the things that she said prior to her dying was, please tell our stories. I get asked all the time, oh my gosh, you're a death doula. Like, isn't that depressing? Isn't that sad? Isn't that just like really hard work? And I'm like, it's hard work, but it's heart work.
Mm.
Whenever I'm able to share aspects of someone's story, it keeps their legacy alive. So I navigate my life with my eyes wide open to be able to say to people, whether you're connected to the military or not, share your story because what's important is what you do in your dash, right? That is the legacy you leave for humanity. That's the legacy you leave for this world. Now, yes, do some of these stories, some stories have a hold, and I've had to learn what self-care looks like because across over 2 decades of doing this work, I've heard really dark stories of what war does to people. And when I need those moments to step away, I step away and I come back to the work because that's my legacy, being a lantern, right, with a light that's just walking veterans home, whatever home may look like as it relates to their culture, as it relates to their end of life, walking them home, and also training communities to be able to walk veterans home. That's the greatest job. I won't even call it job purpose in the world. Because here's what I know for sure, Jenna. We all die. Now, how we die, how we end, we have a little bit of control in that in terms of how do we let people show up for us? How do we show up for other people? What do we want our loved ones to know? What do we want our communities to know? How do we want to be remembered? And so I'm always going to be at the center of storytelling and at the center of healing because that's what we all deserve in terms of ending well.
I'm just going to leave some space to breathe that in. You are a woman with a clear mission. Wow. So I was just enjoying you really expressing your true purpose. It's incredible, Qwynn, like how this is you. You are living in your full being. Um, what has it been like for you as a veteran? You mentioned in one of the talks I was listening to about feeling invisible. Where did that invisibility happen for you specifically, knowing that everyone's story is different? Are there ways that you feel like you've sort of been alone in that experience?
Yeah. So, being in the military, you are around this diverse community all the time, right? But taking the uniform off and coming back into my community, I was invisible. When you close your eyes, and even in Canada, when you envision a veteran, you don't see me, right? You see a Caucasian, older white male that served in Vietnam more often than not. That's what society sees. And when I came home, I was invisible, right? I remember the very first time I interviewed for a civilian job, and they didn't know what the heck to do with me, and I didn't know what the heck to say to them, right? Because my culture was so different coming from the military. And as an African American woman veteran, layer all that on into my identity, and it just felt like the world didn't see me. And for a long time, I didn't even share that I was a veteran. I just did the work. I just did the work. It took another woman veteran saying to me, you need to show up and let people know that you served. That's the only way that we can reduce the invisibility that we see. And so now everywhere I go, you're going to know that I served, right? Like I have to share that because there are women that served many years before me that felt that cloak of invisibility that we don't have to feel anymore if we choose to show up, share our stories, share why we do what we do, knowing that there will be future generations of women veterans that look like us that will be leading efforts across the world.
Incredible. Um, So I don't know a lot about the military in the US or in Canada or anywhere else. What happens when you decide to move outside, when you decide to become a veteran or it becomes your reality? Are you like, can you take me through the system of like what happens beyond? Are people in regular contact with you? Are they kind of like, see you later, thanks a lot? What sort of happens and where along that path are you like, this is a missing piece that you want to fill? Um, and anything that kind of comes up there, because again, for me, it's a huge question mark as to what happens after service.
Yeah. So transition, right? That's huge. And I think um, that's the biggest theme or thread. You know, you put the uniform on and you're insulated in a community, right? Where we all dress the same, we all march to the same beats, we all take orders, right? All of those things are ingrained in us when we serve. But the moment we take that uniform off and we step back into our communities, that's not as insulated, right? It's a challenge because it's one of those, well, what do I do now? What resources are available to me? How do I feel welcomed, accepted, and embraced in my community, whether that's in my faith-based organization or even in the neighborhood where I live, right? There's a huge piece to transition. And do I think across the US, and I'm sure probably in Canada as well, they're doing a better job in how service members transition to becoming veterans? Absolutely, right? But when I got out of the military in 2006, it wasn't that way, right? We were just starting to say, okay, we need to ensure we're wrapping programs around service members as they transition, but it looks different today. Um, but I tell people all the time, even though I've been out of the military almost 20 years, I'm still transitioning. I know when I show up in spaces, there are aspects of my personality that are hardwired because of the military, right? Like I may be a keynote or a guest speaker, and I see people that are, setting up the space. I'm rolling up my sleeves and I'm getting ready to help, and they're looking like, wait, wait, wait. But in the military, I was trained, we all jump in and help, right? Like there's nothing that separates me from getting my hands dirty, helping in a mission. And so when we look at transitions, for many of us, we will transition in some capacity to the day we die. Now,
Mhm.
you have some veterans that transition out of the military, and it's a swift, easy transition. Some of them don't even talk about their experience in the military anymore. It was a piece of, what they did, not a piece of their identity, and they move on. But there are some of us that it's ingrained
Mhm.
in, like what I like to say, in who we be, right?
Yeah.
It's ingrained in everything that I do.
Mhm.
Uh, but what's really ingrained is that service, right? Um, Leaving the military without the feeling that I had a purpose, leaving the military feeling like I was not connected, I had to find a second service because that's also a thread in many of us that end up serving in the military is we want to serve something greater than us. And when I left the military, initially, I didn't know what that looked like. I walked, I think it was almost maybe a year after I got out of the military where I just was looking for purpose and I just wanted to continue to serve. And so 20 years later, that's still what I'm doing. This is my second service just out of uniform.
Oh, it's so beautiful. I'm thinking a lot about what you did this past weekend. And I was thinking about would we can't know this, but if you had done okay, well, we'll talk about what you did this past weekend, but I also want to know, is this something you think could have taken off in the same way 20 years ago? Or do you think that there's something about the time now that allows for something like that to show up? So I'll leave it to you. You can tell us about it, where the idea came from, how it went because it just happened, and how does the relevance of our culture today, the period of time, maybe make it unique in its own way.
You know, 20 years ago, wasn't even thinking that any of this would even be a part of my journey. Heck, a year ago, I didn't think that it would be a part of my journey. But here's how we got to last weekend. In November 2023, I, well, really before, in 2023, I said to my husband, on my bucket list, I want to attend Endwell in LA. And my husband said, okay, let's make that happen. My husband did the whole kit and caboodle, bought me a VIP ticket to attend Endwell 2023. Jenna, I remember sitting in the front row saying to myself, I don't know how, I don't know when, but one of these days I am going to be on the stage for Endwell. Well, I was asked last year to hit the stage for Endwell 2024. And what was a dream became a reality. But right before I hit the stage for Endwell 2024, I had the opportunity to be in a production where I wrote a monologue. Never in a million years did I think that I was going to do anything with monologue. I didn't even know what a monologue was, right?
I
Like
love
that
this so
wasn't a
much.
part of, right? Like it wasn't a part of my world. But I did it and I performed it and I loved it. So I remember asking the team at Endwell, I'm in LA. You only get to do the Endwell stage once. Can I do a monologue? And they said yes. So I performed a monologue at Endwell 2024. And I remember the morning of rehearsal, Jenna.
Mm.
My husband was with me in LA, and I said, okay, I know I have said some wild things the last few years, and you have continuously said, yes, I support you. I said, but I'm going to tell you one more wild thing. I said, I don't know how and I don't know when, but I'm going to produce something in theater, and it's going to be centered around Memorial Day.
Wow.
And my husband looks at me and he has this face like, are you freaking kidding me? Like, what do you mean? You have been a behavioral health professional in public health for how long? And now you're talking about theater? And I'm like, I don't know how it's gonna happen, but I feel it in my bones. I get off stage. We're heading to the there's like a little outdoor get together following Endwell, a reception party. And this woman walks up to me, and I don't have my glasses on, right? Because so many people had hugged me. My glasses were smudged. This woman came up to me and said, Qwynn, can we talk? And I'm like, sure. We start talking, and she's talking about theater. And I'm like, this isn't happening. So I tell my husband, can you clean my glasses? And I'm talking back and forth to her, and I peer at her badge. And it's the one and only Elizabeth Copeland, the founder of Dialogues. And she's like, we need to do something together. And I'm like, holy smokes, this is really getting ready to happen. So within that following week, we collaborated, we had some conversations, we brought in a dynamic woman by the name of Leilani Squire, who is the founder of Returning Soldier Speaks. And we crafted and co-created Grief Dialogues Memorial Day. And it was a theatrical production solely focused on honoring Memorial Day. When the idea first came up for me, it was based on how in Mexican culture they honor the Day of the Dead, right? Where they pay homage to all their family members that have died. And it's huge in Mexican culture. Memorial Day has become a holiday where we celebrate the sales, we celebrate the start of the summer, we celebrate having barbecues. And I'm not saying don't do the things. What I am saying is truly at the center of Memorial Day, it is paying honor and remembrance to those that gave their lives to ensure we have the freedoms to enjoy summer, to enjoy barbecues, to enjoy those sales. And so, what we put on last weekend in LA was an honor and a tribute to those we've lost, an honor and a tribute to allow a community to grieve in public,
Mm-hmm.
and a way to continue to say the names and honor the legacies of those we lost. A dream, when I tell you, Jenna, if I could have that moment for the rest of my life where I go from community to community doing community theater that immerses the audience to tell the stories of the veterans, to tell the stories of those that they were connected to in the military as a way to still share their story, I would do that for the rest of my life. No hesitation.
Qwynn, I think you just named the next big thing that's going to happen to you.
For the rest of my life,
Right?
I'm
Careful
going
what
to
you wish
theater.
for.
I mean, truly, truly,
Yeah. Well,
truly.
you got a good running start at it.
Like, why not? Why not do it, right?
Yeah.
But it was powerful because in that space, you had young, you had old, wise that were sharing this power of connection, this intergenerational connection, this wisdom, isolation. There were so many barriers that just went down because we grieved collectively. Now, why I don't think this would have worked 20 years ago, our humanity was grieving in a different way 20 years ago. But post pandemic, even when you think about LA and all of the fires that happened in Los Angeles a few months ago, collectively, we're grieving. And there's something so powerful in the arts that brings healing. And that's why I truly think the time is now where we can bring people together, Black, white, everything in between, every political affiliation, every demographic, you fill in the blank, bringing them together because one thing is for sure, we all will grieve something. And if we can come together compassionately as a community and do it together in unity, what else is there to do? That's love. That's love just abound, right? It's love abound.
I love it. Okay. There's so many different people, like reasons that people come to this podcast. Some
Yeah.
people are not in grief work or death work. They're just very curious. Maybe they're trying to get comfortable with their own mortality, of the mortality of others, or they're just like, this is a weird name of a podcast. Some people come because they are in death work or grief work. Trying to kind of keep that in mind. If we could leave them with a message around the theme of our conversation today, about end of life for veterans, honoring the stories of veterans, what's something you want them to take away from this very juicy, thick conversation we had?
Hmm. When I think about befriending death, when I think about the hope that I have for the world, right? Because in some aspects, we've lost hope. When we hear other people's experiences, that's an acronym for hope, we're able to befriend death in a different way. When you think about our veterans, many of them have faced death square in the face. But when we're able to listen, when we're able to bear witness and companion, it also allows us to look at our own mortality front and center and ask ourselves, how do we want to show up in this wild thing called life? And how do we want to be remembered? And how do we ensure that we served well, whether that's just in our community or in our home? And how do we choose to let that be a legacy for generations to come?
Thank you deeply for sharing today, Qwynn. This has been such a gift, such a treasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
I want to thank you for tuning in to another episode of the We Are All Dying podcast. My hope is that something from our conversation today sparks a conversation in your own life around death, end of life, and grief. If there's a topic or a guest you'd like to see on the show, please let me know. And I look forward to being in community again with you soon.